You're watching the Run For It YouTube channel. The New Balance Rebel V4 running shoes have been out for a while, and there are a number of reviews on this model. But this is the first season that we're stocking the Rebel at Run For It, and we'd like to share our thoughts. We've been testing out one of the new spring-summer colorways, which New Balance kindly sent us for this review. We will talk through the tech, how they fit, and what they're best suited to. Hope you enjoy. Starting with the midsole, it's pretty well established that New Balance's FuelCell foam can vary quite a lot from model to model. In the Rebel's case, the FuelCell foam is a mixture of PEBA and EVA, so it's 20% PEBA and 80% EVA, and that's designed to deliver an ultra light and energetic underfoot experience. The men's weigh 197 grams and the women's weigh 158 grams, so that makes the Rebel incredibly light. When it comes to the stack height, the heel is 30 millimeters and the forefoot is 24 millimeters. So that is a little bit lower than some potential competitor models within this category, such as the Nova Blast. But it's worth noting if the midsole stack was a lot higher, that would add quite a bit of weight to the shoe. And again, going back to that point on the weight, the Rebel is one of the lightest models out there. It's also important to note that a lot of runners still prefer that slightly more connected sensation and don't like the feeling of an ultra high stacked midsole. Now, as cool and aesthetically pleasing as this midsole is, there are some functional benefits to the unique shaping and design. And I'm sure there's a New Balance expert somewhere who can go into great detail about the benefits of the way this midsole is constructed. But it's likely that this specific shaping increases the energy return from the foam and also makes it more stable, which is very important. It's worth again pointing out that the width of the midsole base is pretty broad, and that increases the inherent stability of the cushioning. Given that the outsole rubber on a running shoe is one of the heaviest parts, it's quite surprising to see such a high degree of outsole rubber on the Rebel given how light they are. There's a good section through the forefoot, even extends into the midfoot area, and there's two decent sections at the rear foot of the shoe. Obviously, there is quite a lot of exposed FuelCell foam there, but they're actually, it's unlikely you're going to be contacting that area too much, and there's certainly a lot more rubber on this than there would be on something like a racing shoe. So again, this should really help improve the durability of the midsole. It's not going to be the most durable shoe in the world from that perspective, as the rubber is relatively thin, but again, just want to point out that for how light these are and what they're designed for, there's quite a high level of outsole coverage. We could be wrong, but the rubber on the lateral edge where you would land, where you would hit if you were heel striking, feels ever so slightly thicker, and it could be a slightly more durable compound that just delivers slightly greater durability than the rest of the midsole, which again is very beneficial for those of us who heel strike and land in that area of the midsole. When it comes to the upper, it is all about keeping the weight down. It is incredibly light and it's almost transparent or see-through in areas. The Phantom Fit design really does deliver an exceptionally light fit and feel. There is a heel counter, so you do have some structure at the back of the shoe, and the tongue is fully gusseted, which also helps improve the midfoot hold and stops the tongue from slipping around. But it's worth pointing out that the tongue is exceptionally thin and it's not really doing much to reduce any form of lace pressure. This is a very important point of the review, as we're going to talk about the sizing. And it is very fair to say that the Rebel come up a bit short when it comes to the sizing. Unless you prefer a really snug and very fitted feel, then we would definitely recommend going up half a size, and that's in comparison to your normal running shoe size. For me, I find that the 1080 even fits slightly bigger, and 1080 offers quite a snug fit. So It's going to be different for everybody. That's not going to be a blanket statement, but we don't always say you should definitely go up half a size in a running shoe because we know people are different. But in this case, really just you are going to be quite close to the end if you choose your normal running shoe size in the Rebel. And in my case, my right foot is ever so slightly bigger than my left foot, so I was really catching my toe on the end of the shoe. Testament to the quality of the upper and the fabric construction is that that's not caused any bruising, no blisters. I just know it would feel a little bit more comfortable with that slightly bigger size. And there's a lot to be said as well for the fact that if you aren't able to relax your feet in a shoe, you could actually compromise the power that you're able to produce and also your efficiency because you're concerned about that toe hitting off the end of the shoe. So it is really important that your feet can splay out inside a running shoe. And quite often the width of the shoe will change more than the length of the shoe when you go up half a size. So just that half size bigger helps let your feet settle down into the position that they should be in. On to the test runs. As the Rebel are regarded as being hyper versatile, we decided to test them out at a range of slow, steady, and fast speeds. So the next section of the episode will cover how the Rebel performs at these different intensities and efforts. When you step into the midsole, it feels very light and feels relatively protective. At the same time, it feels quite flat. And at an easy pace, yes, the midsole is pretty bouncy, but you can feel quite a lot of the ground. And it doesn't feel anything like as forgiving as your typical everyday mileage running shoe, such as the 1080. So yes, you can use the Rebel for your easy pace runs, but you're probably not going to get the most benefit from the midsole at that type of intensity. And the New Balance 1080 running shoes are likely to feel a lot more comfortable and protective under your feet at that type of intensity. I think it's fair to say if you buy the Rebel V4 running shoes with the expectation that they're going to feel ultra comfortable and plush for your easy miles, you're going to be a bit disappointed. And it's likely that these also won't last as long as your typical everyday mileage running shoe. So in reality, it's not going to be the best shoe to run in for your everyday easy miles. This all changes when you pick up the pace in the Rebel and start to run steady, as the light and energetic foam starts to feel absolutely amazing. And while the midsole isn't that thick, it doesn't bottom out at all. So it feels really protective. So you can do those slightly longer, steady runs in the cushioning as well. And it's fair to say that as you start to get closer and closer to tempo, the midsole just feels better and better as you really start to feel that responsiveness and energy return from the cushioning. And that's the biggest difference between the Rebel and your typical everyday mileage running shoe, which will feel a bit heavy and a bit clunky as you start to go through the gears. This feels the absolute opposite because it just starts to feel much more agile and propulsive. And I think one key thing to point out again with the midsole is that a lot of shoes like this are going higher and higher in stack height, and there's a lot of runners who just don't like that sensation. They like to feel connected to the midsole, feel a little bit more of the ground. And while you're getting a lot of protection, you do feel that increased sense of connection in the Rebel V4 running shoes, which is a really nice experience when you're just cruising along at those tempo intensities. To try and find out the limit of the Rebel midsole, we actually used a treadmill. It's a very controlled environment. You don't have to worry about the wind or elevation. And we thought it was a really good way to see at what point did the midsole start to feel like it was not performing at its optimal. So the test consisted of 3 10-minute blocks that built in speed. So the first 10 minutes was done at 16 kilometers an hour, which is around 3:45 minute per kilometer pace. The second 10-minute block was done at 17 kilometers an hour, which is around 3:31 minute per kilometer pace. And the final 10-minute block was done at 18 kilometers an hour, which is around 3:20 minute per kilometer pace. And there was no rest between any of those 10-minute blocks. We just went the whole way through the 30-minute session. So in terms of intensity, for me, that was building from around LT1 right up to that LT2, that second lactate turn point. So if you're not familiar with what that means in terms of the terms, that was building from a fast but very sustainable speed. So 3:45 minute per kilometer pace is slower than marathon speed for me, but 3:20 minute per kilometer pace becomes a fast and unsustainable speed because I'm not running a marathon quite at 3:20 minute per kilometer pace. As you'd expect at 16 kilometers an hour, that sort of light tempo intensity, the midsole feels great. It feels light, energetic, and very agile. And because there's quite a lot of protection under your feet, it's fair to say that you can do pretty long sessions at that sort of pace. So if you're doing a 40 to 60-minute tempo run where you're just trying to cruise along at a very consistent speed, that's where this cushioning should feel very comfortable. As I progressed to marathon pace or marathon effort, so around that 3:30 to 3:35 minute per kilometer pace, the cushioning did continue to perform pretty well. So light, energetic, pretty responsive. But if you're used to a plated model or any form of shoe which has a structure in it that increases the responsiveness of the midsole, that's where you will really start to notice the difference between the Rebel and that type of model. And it's just because as this doesn't have any stiffer structure in the midsole, you lose some of that forward propulsion that you will get from a plated running shoe, and that definitely leads to an increase in your perception of effort, and you're probably just going to be slightly less efficient using slightly more oxygen in the Rebel versus that obviously super shoe construction. So it's likely that that sort of intensity is getting to the ceiling of this midsole in terms of where you would want to use it to. There's probably something to be said for the fact that if you did do some training at that type of intensity in the Rebel, when you then transition back into a plated super shoe, you might notice a greater benefit from that additional help and structure. So there's definitely something to be said for using the Rebel for some of those maybe marathon intensity sessions. However, you probably just want to make sure that your legs are feeling particularly fresh for that effort, and you maybe also don't want to run too long. So I certainly wouldn't recommend doing something like 4 times 5 kilometers at marathon pace in the Rebel, because I think by the end of it, you could find that your feet and legs were probably working a little bit harder than they need to. And you can probably see where this is going with the next section. Yes, we could run at 3:20 minute per kilometer pace in the Rebel, but it really wasn't feeling amazing at that sort of intensity. And yes, there will be some runners out there who are hyper efficient at that type of effort, and will find that the Rebels does feel pretty good for that sort of workout. But for the majority of runners, if you're doing a upper threshold session, a hard VO2 effort, the Rebel really isn't the best option for that type of training session. That's where a plated super shoe, or even just more of a hybrid shoe but with a plate, is going to feel a lot better under your feet. And certainly wouldn't be doing any sessions like 5 times a K or 10 times a K at threshold in the Rebel running shoes. The only kind of slight caveat to that is if you were doing a 30, 40-minute run and you were just doing some strides, so let's say you're doing 8, 10, 30 seconds reps where you were picking up the speed to 10k pace, and you just wanted to get your legs turning over, freshen up your legs, maybe you're in between hard sessions or you're prepping for a race, that's where this shoe will feel really good, and it does feel nice for those short, fast bursts of speed. And again, that is why the Rebel are regarded as being so versatile, is the midsole does genuinely perform across a very wide range of intensities. So overall, the Rebel are amazingly suited to steady runs and tempo efforts. And this is a bit of a dream shoe to have in your shoe rotation if you like to have 3 or 4 models on the go, which a lot of runners do. And there's a lot of benefits to doing that, because for a lot of runners who rotate between different pairs, I think they're pretty set on the shoes that they use for their easy miles and for their long runs, and then for their fast, high intensity sessions, such as those 10 by a K efforts or those long half marathon workouts. But there's quite a lot of maybe uncertainty about what's the best shoe to use in between those. Do you use your plated shoe for those tempo sessions and drop down and run a bit slower, or do you use your slightly more built up, slightly higher stack shoe for those sessions and try and run a bit faster in it? That's where the Rebel really sits in that sweet spot. So if you're doing your longer easy runs in a slightly heavier, bulkier everyday mileage running shoe, and then you're doing your faster workouts in a plated super shoe model, the Rebel is really designed for everything that sits in between those intensities. So everything from that kind of first lactate turn point right up to that sort of marathon intensity pace. And as we've mentioned throughout the episode, there is no doubt these are incredibly versatile. We can see why they're so popular and why they're pitched as being fun, everyday mileage running shoes. However, we'd throw a little bit of caution into the mix with regards to using these for lots of easy, everyday miles. You're just going to get the most back from them when you try and run a little bit faster in them. That's when they're going to feel at their best. And if you're running further than 5-6 kilometers at an easy effort, then you're probably going to benefit from a midsole, which is just a bit more forgiving, a little bit more built up under your feet. But obviously everybody's different, and you can definitely use these for some of those easy miles. I think quite a good way to summarize the Rebel is if you were going away for a few days and you could only pack one pair of running shoes, but you know that you're going to do a few different runs while you're away, the Rebel would be a great shoe to take away with you, because you could use it for that easy run, that steady run, and then a few intervals as well. And that brings me to the end of this episode. Thank you very much for watching. If you enjoyed it, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more content like this. As always, if you have any questions at all, please comment on the episode. See you soon.